morning, everyone, and thanks for joining today's briefing at the Jerusalem Press Club. We're now 26 days into Israel's defensive war, following the heinous attack against its south. The IDF has dialed up its ground operation against Hamas at the expense of many of its own soldiers in the past 24 hours. Loss of life continues, of course, in Gaza as well, with terrorists utilizing their intricate tunnel system to continue their activities, including rocket fire against Israeli cities. The northern border remains quiet but tense, and Yemenite Houthis have flexed their muscle by launching drones and missiles towards Israel. The end does not appear in sight. To address this latest escalation and Israel's current challenges, we welcome back Dr. Eyal Hulata, the most recent national security advisor and head of the National Security Council at the Prime Minister's office in Israel. Today, a visiting fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Hello, Dr. Hulata. Thank you again for joining us from Washington.
Thank you, Talia, and hello to all. We've done this a few times already. I will start, as always, with a description of how I see things, and then we can move to Q&A. And you're never shy. You ask whatever you want, and I'll try to respond to the best I can from my position here in Washington. So first, I think what's important to say is that since Israel started this new phase of ground maneuver and I think by and large, it seems that the objectives are advancing, I would say, properly, right? I'm using very delicate words here because if Israel wanted to use this ground strike in the maximum impact possible, then more forces would have been introduced in a wider contact apparatus and in more places, in more stages, with more fire and everything with it. Israel is moving very delicately, very slowly. I'm sure you will ask. I'll say even before you ask, an incident like in Jabalia is very unique in its magnitude of attack and also casualties on civilians. But by and large, you see the Israeli military advancing very slowly, very cautiously, not falling into traps, and trying to avoid, to the extent possible, hitting centers of population of Gazans. And this is the outcome of that is that also the gains from this maneuver are not advancing very fast, and this will take time, as you hear all of the Israeli speakers and people say. This issue of time is a dramatic parameter. I just posted a column this morning. Some of you may have seen it. In my opinion, the Israeli decision makers are not tuned enough to how little time they might have if things progress the way they do. I do not think, as some of the ministers and spokesmen said, that this war can continue without what we call a diplomatic clock. I don't know if it's a proper translation to English, but this is the term we use in Hebrew. I don't think it's true. There is a diplomatic clock, and it's ticking fast. And even if an event like in Jabalia is justified, the amount of things like that we can do, of course, will be eventually limited. I'm also very tuned to look at what's happening in foreign capitals. There's a lot of support to Israel, but there are also a growing amount of protests against us, and we know how this drill works. There will come a time where world leaders might think that this is problematic to them, and even if it's not justified, they will exert pressure. That's the reality of things. So Israel needs to be more careful about the time that it uses, and I hope that this will reverberate with the decision makers more strongly. And this is especially important because the goals that were set by the government are very high, to eliminate Hamas capabilities of threatening civilians, and also its governing capabilities, that's a very high bar to be achieved, and especially if it's in a low, limited period of time. Of course, a lot of that can be done in a third phase that can happen after this formal war ends. And clearly, I can tell you, it's quite certain, Israel will continue to work in Gaza even after this ends. This will come to the question of what is the day after. Well, first is when is the day that we start thinking of when is the tomorrow of that day, and Israel will continue to operate in Gaza, I'm sure, even after, because we will need to take down the Hamas leaders, and as I put in my column, at least until we get back all of our detainees, snatched, hostages, missing in action, all of them. This cannot be only about the children and the women and the elderly. Of course, this should have happened a long time ago, and Hamas should have released them before that. And they choosing not to do it, of course, is unfortunately not surprising to me, but very very sad. But this will not end when they only release them. We'll need to release all of the captives, the hostages, and the missing in action. So this will definitely progress over time. Another aspect that I wrote about, and that is getting more traction in Israel, the decision-making levels, is the security arrangements when this war ends, whether we did or were able to eliminate Hamas as leadership, and also if not, if there are about 200,000 Israelis who left their homes from around Gaza, and for them to go back home, there's a minimum sense of security that they need to provide to their families, to their kids, so that they can come back to their homes and live. This cannot happen when gunmen from Gaza, whether they are Hamas or extremists that will come after them, can endanger those communities, which some of them are literally, as you know, because some of you have been there, are really close to the fence. So we need a new buffer zone, a demilitarized buffer zone inside of Gaza that is wide enough to serve as another security measure, so that we can eventually, sometime, try to come back to normal life in the surrounding of Gaza. We'll also need to take far better care of what's happening in Rafah crossing, through which Hamas has been able to smuggle and infiltrate a lot of the equipment that they've done before. We knew that. And Israel, just for various reasons, refrained from dealing with that directly with the Egyptians and with other issues. All this belongs to the past. We will need to take care of that. This cannot continue the way it did after what happened in October 7th. So these are the main kind of challenges I think we have now, and we'll need to see how these continue. There's one more thing I just want to make sure that I say, and of course you can ask about it, about the humanitarian situation in the south of Gaza. I wrote about it and I talk about it in all of my interviews, and I think it's very, very important to understand. Israel is not blocking humanitarian aid to south of Gaza. Not only doesn't it block, it allows almost all of it to come through Israel, and from us, through Mitzana to Egypt, to Sinai, and then through Rafah crossing. We take on ourselves to do all of the testing. We don't expect the Egyptians to do any of that. And any amount of trucks that will be able to pass Israel will need to, and I'm sure would, be able to deal and to check, so that we're not blocking those amounts. It's not in Hamas' interest that the world knows that Israel is doing whatever it can and whatever it is asked to do for the humanitarian situation south of Gaza, because it's not in their interest to make us look good. It's in their interest to make us look bad. But I urge and ask all of you to go check and verify how many trucks have been in, how many of them have been, if at all, blocked by Israel, how many of them were blocked by Hamas, and are there any humanitarian aid that is waiting to be passed that Israel is unable to deal with the flow to that extent? I think you will find none. There is the issue of the diesel, and Israel is very stubborn about that, and I want to explain why. The diesel is the only thing that is considered humanitarian, but can actually help Hamas in their fight against us. They need the diesel for the electricity. Otherwise, they need to get out of their tunnels, because without air supply, they cannot live in those tunnels. And this is dramatic. There is a lot of diesel in Gaza. And that diesel that is kept by Hamas for their fighting purposes, other than given to the places where it should go, which is to the civilian population, to the hospitals, and to all of the other institutions. That's a deep part of the problem. And I'm saying this because Israel needs to be stubborn on this. And my expectation is that the international community understands. We will provide all of the humanitarian needs. We'll provide medicine and food and water and clothes and housing and whatever is needed to help the Gazans who are in a growing and escalating humanitarian crisis, for sure, because of the war that was imposed on Israel. But the issue of diesel is crucial, and Hamas need to be pressed to surrender its diesel for the institutions. And we have all of the figures. We know exactly what they're doing and how much they're keeping and how much they have stored. The IDF spokesman have talked about it, and he can give you all the numbers, and the Kogat team can give you all the numbers. And this is a very important issue. Talia, we'll go to questions.
Sure. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Hulata. A few questions have come in, but before we address the specific ones, I'll ask you just a general question in terms of the resilience of the Israeli population, because you paint a picture in which, on the one hand, there's hope for releasing the hostage, the kidnapped. There's hope for releasing those who were kidnapped if we put off a larger, more extensive military operation and delay delay this kind of decimation of Hamas, as you suggested, to sometime in the future. So on the one hand, it builds resilience in that we will see Israelis return to their homes, but on the other hand, the government will in effect backtrack on its stated goals at the beginning, which the public has been following and wanting to see implemented. Right. And you also touched on the 200,000 plus Israelis who have been made refugees in their own countries, who might not necessarily go home because they will continue having Hamas on their immediate border. So how will this all play into the home front's ability to continue having faith in the government, wanting to return to their homes? How will Israel continue to operate regularly if following this plan that you suggest?
Right. So first of all, I mean the security of the population and the sense of security, and unfortunately now it's not the same thing at all, is crucial and key to all of the decision making that should be done and must be done in the government. As you've seen from my column, if you read it, I'm not sure that the priorities are dealt with properly. So I can tell you what I think, not necessarily to explain the government. Clearly, there needs to be a balance between them. Last week, Israel was, I think, close to agreeing to a deal to release the children and women and elderly among the hostages. And there was a sense that this can happen. There was Qatari involvement, and you've seen Tzachi Hanegbi, my successor, also pay tribute to the Qataris for the positive role that they played in this, but eventually it didn't play out. It didn't play out because, from what I understand, Hamas thought that they need to use this opportunity to get things that are beyond the scope of what's happening now, both in terms of the amount of prisoners and diesel and other things, and a ceasefire, and a whole bunch of things that we just cannot do at this stage. I would argue that if there was a possibility to get all of them out, all of the hostages, including the soldiers, and including the 4 ones that are still in Hamas' hands from protectivage, I would propose to the government to take that and to stop it, and to continue what we're doing later. But unfortunately, I don't expect Hamas to agree to such a setting at this point. The sword is not close enough to their neck for that. There will come a dilemma, I hope, where we are able to exert enough pressure on Hamas that they will ask for it. And my position will be to do it. And even if it means that Hamas leadership stays, at least for a while, because we need to get everybody back. It's an obligation of the government, of the security establishment. Enough civilian lives have been taken. Enough suffering was done because of the government's inability to secure its citizens, and it will be the obligation of the government to do that if such a scenario appears. So this is to answer that. The second part of it, of course, has to do with a sense of security. I think I said what I think about that. This has to be a high criteria working. It means that some of the operational, if not a lot of the operational capabilities need to be focused on creating that buffer zone that I spoke about and others are talking about, even if it means that we don't make the progress that the military wants into Gaza, because it's difficult to do all of it at once.
Okay, very clear. I want us at some point to move on to the other fronts that are open or not. Just one last question that a reporter is posing specifically on military tactics. If you can comment, saying that a former defense official floated one option of not continuing the large-scale ground operation into southern Gaza if Hamas's center of gravity in Gaza City is dismantled and senior terrorists are eliminated before they move south. Is that at all realistic, or is this just not kicking the can further down the road?
I can't give a very good answer to that. I think the fact that Israel has declared that we're focused on northern Gaza allows to create, of course, some kind of a safe haven in the south of Gaza. I think in the striking of balance between things, that was a good decision and a good approach. We need to allow the civilians of Gaza to be safe or relatively safe somewhere. Those who actually move to the south and those who are not blocked by Hamas from moving to the south. Of course, it so happens, and I would actually, my personal opinion is that some of Hamas leaders are already in the south of Gaza. And maybe some of them are no longer in Gaza at all. This also could be the case, but clearly, I don't expect them to be where the IDF is operating. This is an essential part of the difficulty of fighting Hamas as a terror organization within population. They're doing whatever they can to use the large Palestinian population not only as human shields, but also to create this kind of diversions, as I just said. This is part of the problem. We'll need to do it.
Okay. I promised we'd move on to another front, but someone is just asking about whether we can expect any more rescue operations for kidnapped victims, like we saw with the soldier a few days ago.
I hope so. I think what you see from that is that whenever there is an opportunity, there's intel and capability, Israel will do that. Of course, lives have been risked to do this, but this is part of our ethos, and I'm sure that whenever there is an opportunity, this will happen. The circumstances of how this was possible, how this was done, I don't want to get into the details of this, but I'm sure that some of you were already able to get more details on how this happened. It just signifies how difficult this issue of the hostages is. They're dispersed all over Gaza, held by different kind of groups and entities for different purposes. This is going to make this very, very difficult to release them all, but we will need to continue on that front. So I hope that we will see more rescue operations.
Okay, thank you. So moving north, the last time we spoke, or any time before that, we were always wondering, when we're going to see a further flare up on the border. Things were relatively calm last week, but then we saw a house in Kiryat Shmona, a city on the north, directly hit. But yet no active, larger decision to join the war. What do you think Hezbollah's red lines are for, crossing?
Right. So first, I think we need to recognize that the red lines that we used to know from Hezbollah have already been crossed. Israel has killed dozens of Hezbollah terrorists, gunmen, and other operative capabilities along the border over the last almost 4 weeks. In numbers that, in a different circumstances, Nasrallah would already have fired rockets in large numbers to the back of Israel, right? What he calls the equations, right? The equations are broken. Of course, we're in a different situation, a different war, but this is the case. I hear from my friends within the establishment that they feel that Hezbollah are kind of frustrated that they cannot succeed more in damaging us? Maybe. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not seeing from close proximity or reviewing intel to know how this is playing out. But clearly, if they wanted to join, they had plenty of opportunities to do, and they don't. I don't think that the reason for that is deterrence, not by us, not by the United States. I think the reason for that is a very cold calculus. One of their proxies is already suffering very dearly, and they need their proxies for future rounds. I mean, this isn't the end of Iran's campaign to kick Israel out of the region, and they will need Hezbollah for future stages. The interesting question is what's happening with the Houthis in Yemen. This is a proxy that tried in the past to direct at us, not very successfully, and now it is happening in growing numbers. So my assessment is that Iran feels that the situation in Gaza is not evolving in the right way. The Hamas isn't able to inflame the West Bank, which I'm sure is something that the Iranians would have wanted to happen weeks ago, because then there's more pressure on Israel without their need to pay any price. And when they need to weigh who is the next, what's the next tool that they deploy into the battlefield, I guess they felt that they better keep Hezbollah for future stages. And bless you, and send the Houthis into that. There are a lot of weapons in Yemen, a lot of rockets, a lot of missiles, air to air, surface to surface, and cruise missiles, as we've seen. And I'm happy to see that our defense systems are capable of blocking them. First the Americans, and now ours. And we need to keep a close eye on what's happening there. I'm not in a position to propose to other countries what they need to do. I'm just flagging that when President Biden said in that press conference that other parties shouldn't take advantage of that, well, they are. And when it comes to the Houthis, nobody can say that it's not Iran behind it, because everybody knows that they only dance to the pipe of Iran, and here they are. And also the attacks against American forces in Syria and Iraq are also conducted in direct instructions of Iran. No question about that as well. So the entire environment is more inflammatory. I would keep a close eye on Nasrallah's speech on Friday. It will be the first time he speaks since the war started. I have no intel, but I can still tell you what I think will be there. Number one, of course, he will use this opportunity to say that he was always right. Israel is fragile. It's like a spider web. And how easy was it for Hamas to hit us and try to shame us and our people? Well, we deserve it. We'll suck it up. We did indeed fail, and no way to shy from it. But I don't expect him to announce that he's going to escalate. I do expect him to defy the American threats and the Israeli threats and all of that in very strong and bombastic words. But I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe that this is the amount that we should expect. But he does hold the keys to real escalation of the situation. If he decides to act differently, or there's a miscalculation between the IDF and Hezbollah over this, this can still inflame into a not global, but regional conflict. Hopefully not more than that.
So the threats are very clear. Thank you. I think there's a question to be raised about the Arab states. For several weeks now, we've been talking about the fact that this whole operation might have been, might have been carried out in order to prevent Israel-Saudi normalization. Could the very obvious growing threat that Iran has through its proxies perhaps be a catalyst for returning to normalization, whether it's with Saudi or other moderate states?
Right. Yeah, so that's a very good question, and I have to say that I think that many countries are involved in that. I can give you my take. Part of it is based on conversations that I'm having with my contacts, but also with others who deal with that. By and large, I think, the sense in the, I'll call it, moderate Arab world. So more the Abraham Accords countries than the traditional immediate neighbors. Is a strong sense of disgust with Hamas, an understanding that this poses a threat to them, and that Israel better succeed in what they're doing, otherwise they can be up next. I'm very happy with the way that the UAE have changed their tone. They did vote against the decision in the UN Security Council, but I didn't expect that to pass anyway. The Russians and the Chinese have vetoed it. But when I listen to what they say, also in the UN and other places, I think we're hearing the amount of support that we can expect from a country in their situation. Clearly, I think from all of the directions, it is eminent that Saudis would want to return to the process of normalization. Their interests are way stronger than this. In fact, I think that the Saudis need to ask themselves, of course, Israel needs to ask itself, how did we allow Hamas to derail this process of normalization? But I think also the Saudis are probably asking themselves, how did that happen? Because of course the people who were murdered are Jews, but the country that suffers also from the strategic consequences of that is Saudi Arabia, because the chances that they will be able on time to finish this deal with the Americans and with the Israelis is slim, of course, given the circumstances. And that's a win to Iran. And this is not good for Saudi Arabia, and with and without a connection to Israel. So I'm sure that they're asking themselves those questions. My expectation is that they don't only ask themselves these questions, but also act accordingly and add a lot of pressure on Hamas and also on Qatar, which is playing a very tricky game as it comes to Hamas, of course, before the war, but unfortunately also after the war. So this is kind of a perspective on those countries. We'll need to see how this plays out. I'm way more, I will use the word disappointed, if not angry, at the way that the Jordanians are dealing with this, to hear statements from the palace, from the Queen, that Israel does not have a right to defend itself because we're occupiers. This is completely. I mean, I don't know what words to use towards Her Royal Highness. This is absurd. And also Egypt, I think they can play a more constructive role in this and putting the pressure on Hamas. I'm happy that the crossing was open so that foreign Gazans could leave, and injured Gazans could leave if they're possible. If it's possible to do that, clearly it's possible also to have our hostages moved out of Gaza as well.
That's a very, very good point. I think we'll wrap up with a final question on Russia, because you touched on it very very gently, but we also saw anti-Semitic riots in Russia against a plane full of Israelis, and that followed statements from the Kremlin, as well as global protests against the war, whether they were justified or not, whether they were based on information or misinformation, but this is the result at the end of the day. So without getting into an entire debate on the spread of anti-Semitism, because we've done that previously and we might do it next time, maybe if we can focus specifically on Russia. Yeah. What do you think the greatest threat right now coming out of Moscow is vis-a-vis Israel? Yeah,
so I think, first of all, more broadly speaking, for months now, even when at the end of the previous government, we felt a shift or a change in the way Russia, mainly because of the relationship with Iran, had an effect on the relationship with us. And we changed our tone versus Russia over this and other means, and this is disturbing, because if Russia can give a lot of assistance to Iran in ways that can pose significant damage or risks on Israel, and it seems like they've chosen that path. Russia doesn't often support Israel on the international floor. Quite difficult to remember when they voted in favor of us and not against us in such circumstances, but it's much more than that. And there is need to reevaluate that, first of all, bilaterally between Israel and Russia. I would think it's been going on for such a long time, and it has so many attributes that we need to do this and to reevaluate that. That's point number one. Of course, what happened in Dagestan, I wouldn't be surprised if this came as an instruction from the Russian authorities. I would assume that they could do more to block it, or at least to deal with it once it erupted, and that's very devastating. But as you said, I mean, we don't dive into this necessarily in this briefing, but the rise of anti-Semitism, of acts of not only protests but acts of violence against Jews, signs on shops in France, and all of those other issues that we see on the media, those are all very, very disturbing. I think we all need to pay attention to that and understand that there is a responsibility of all of those countries to that. Israel did not bring this upon itself. We did not ask for this. We did not start this. We were butchered in ways that we didn't since the Second World War. And the fact that we still need to stand and defend every single time our right of existence here in this land, and to hear people chant without knowing actually what they're chanting, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. You are in Israel, you know which is the river and where's the sea and what's between it. So if Palestine will be free from the river to the sea, it means that no Jews can be there and Israel needs to cease to exist. Is that really what is getting support in all of those Western capitals? Really? This is very heartbreaking. I'm telling you, as a Jew, as I think a rational person that understands and empathic to the pain of others, that believes that we need a solution that is not only justified but honorable also for our neighbors, the Palestinians. How can we hear all those violence and anti-Semitism actions and look to the other side? It's really disturbing, frightening, and I think says a lot about the trends and currents that are happening in the Western world.
I wanted that to be the last question, but you prompted another one, so I can't help myself. Do you think, and is it your experience that the Israeli leadership takes into consideration the kind of the fallout onto Jews around the world when these things occur?
They must take that into consideration, and it is Israel's responsibility as a protector of the Jewish people in Israel to serve also as a protector of the Jewish people around the world. It doesn't mean that we need to stop the war. On the contrary, but we need to work with the governments, with the communities, and to restore sense of security, not only in Israel, but also around the world. This is the responsibility of the leadership of the Jewish people in Israel.
Dr. Eyal Hulata, Israel's most recent national security advisor and head of the National Security Council at the Prime Minister's office. Thank you again for your time as usual, and really we appreciate every minute that we can get your insight, your valuable insight for.
Thank you, Talia. Thank you all. Bye-bye.